Egypt to Japan without flying, day 87. Today, I crossed from Iran to Afghanistan. From the last big city in Iran, I took this shared van all the way to the border. And all the passengers on board were Afghans, except me. It was a rainy day and we had a 4-hour drive to the border, with not many cars going in the same direction. The weather was terrible. Strong winds, heavy rains. When we got to the border, I counted 4 checkpoints to finally cross, with many luggage searches. On the Iranian side, everyone was waiting for me as I was questioned by Iranian police and had my phone searched. While on the Afghanistan side, I was waiting for everyone, while I mingled with some friendly locals who welcomed me. Eventually, there were problems with the van paperwork, so we had to switch vehicles. It was more cramped, but I didn't mind at all. I was just psyched for being in Afghanistan. After driving through beautiful landscape, we encountered what I would best describe as a river flowing across the road. The driver waited for some time to assess the situation, then we went ahead and drove across. Then we encountered an even deeper one. I could see many vehicles having problems, including ourselves. We had an engine problem which we tried to fix for about half an hour, but without success, so we basically limped the rest of the way. And closer to the city, we saw how strong those rivers could flow after heavy rainfall. Thankfully though, we had a bridge this time. Upon arrival, I was warmly welcomed by my host family, the family of a friend of mine. We had a family dinner to get to know each other, then I showered using 2 buckets, then went into a comfortable sleep. Egypt to Japan without flying, day 88. After having breakfast and sharply dressed like an Afghani, I went out with my host family into the city. It's my first full day in Afghanistan, so the first stop we made is to change my dollars into Afghanis. Also, because I just arrived, I need to register with the Ministry of Tourism, and I need to do that in every province I go to in Afghanistan. And then we did some sightseeing. First, we went to the Central Blue Mosque, which is the 5th largest mosque in the world, and then we went to the Old Citadel. And for lunch, we went back home briefly to have a traditional homemade dish. I have to say, the streets of this city were a bit messy, and the driving reminded me a lot of Cairo. Then we made an attempt to get me a SIM card. The employees were so lost about registering a foreigner, they just didn't know what to do. Eventually, after an hour, we all gave up and it did not work. To cool off our nerves, we went to the city park where many people were chilling and playing some games. There was a private area of the park which was closed off, but they made an exception just because I'm Egyptian. And inside we watched some cricket, which is Afghanistan's most popular sport. We then got a local corn-based snack and drove up the hills, where we could see the entire city from above. But then we encountered a roadblock and a guy with a rifle. Yes, the Taliban. We asked for permission to go to the viewpoint. He agreed and started walking us there. What we didn't know is that this was the main post of the Taliban above the city, where there are 12-15 Taliban guys chatting with me for half an hour, surrounding me, asking me questions. But to be honest, it was more out of curiosity than anything else. We then made our way back to the city, where we had a family dinner to conclude this eventful first day in Afghanistan. Egypt to Japan without flying, day 89. After having breakfast, my Afghan host family very generously gifted me this traditional dress. We then drove outside of town by the river, where we practiced rifle shooting and horse riding. The water was very murky, but that didn't stop the local kids from playing around in it, or this guy rafting on a rubber wheel. We paid a visit to another ancient mosque in the city, then went to the bus terminal where I got my ticket. Don't worry, not for this one. That one, where everyone must take off their shoes before boarding the bus. That was a first. And I bid farewell to my new Afghan family. Couldn't be more thankful for their hospitality. The scenery on the road was beautiful. And after a while, the driver and the bus owner noticed I was a foreigner and invited me to sit at the front with them. The owner used to work as a translator, so thankfully there was no language barrier. And I was surprised to know that they were not switching drivers. It was only one guy driving us 19 hours straight to Kabul, the capital. Later, we had a dinner stop on the way where they snuck me into the driver's room where we get a free meal. Amazing hospitality to foreigners. Egypt to Japan without flying, day 90. I woke up on the night bus with scenic views all around as we were approaching Kabul, Afghanistan's capital. The road was in a disastrous condition given it's the main highway between the 2 biggest cities of the country. That's because of many explosions over the years. When we arrived, I hopped on a taxi. And so far in Afghanistan, I've been surprised that most cars have the wheel on the right side, like the UK, although the streets are not designed like that. My first impression was how polluted the air was here. We could see a big cloud of dust before we entered the city. Then I arrived at my host's place, a friend of a friend. Yes, that's the same friend whose family I stayed with at the first stop. He's the best and has been hooking me up with hosts all over the country. I got into another Afghan dress, but not long after I was feeling unwell, with some fever and stomach unrest. The doctor told me it's because of the air pollution in the city and that many people wear masks when they arrive. They even wipe dust off plates before they eat, like in Interstellar. I powered through as my host had friends over for dinner because it was his birthday. Egypt to Japan without flying, day 92. This morning my host dropped me off on his way to work. Again wearing local clothes. Don't I just look dashing in them? I need to sort out travel permits, so first I went to the Ministry of Culture, which is in a very heavily guarded area of government buildings. I was directed to an office where I needed to specify every single province I intend to go to in Afghanistan. Once I completed that process, I needed to take that paper to the Ministry of Tourism. So I walked over there, and on the way I passed this open field where kids were playing cricket, jumping on trampolines, and even some goats hanging around. When you go to government buildings here, everyone takes off their shoes first before entering, like in a mosque. And all the places are full of carpets, which I really like. No worries, it's not as smelly as you might think. Everyone at the Ministry of Tourism was kind, the process went smoothly, and I got my permit. Then I noticed there was a cricket game going on, so I went to the stadium to watch. Well, not in the stadium, but on the fences next to these armed guards, who were very curious and friendly with me. There are so many guns here everywhere that I notice myself getting used to them, even if they're pointing at me, albeit unintentionally. And later that night, my host and his friend took me for a drive around the city. They told me so many stories about fighting, embassy closures, explosions, one of which caused this crack in my friend's car's front windshield. Then they took me out for dinner to a place where people go for what they said is Afghan burgers, although it turned out to be actually a wrap, like this video. Egypt to Japan without flying, day 93. The next 10 days will be very busy, so today I'm having an off day, and I thought of sharing with you some of the observations I'm having here in Afghanistan. We woke up today to a power cut, which I'm told happens a lot here. I also woke up to the news that there was a bomb explosion in the square that I was in yesterday, carried out by Taliban opposition groups. Apparently this stuff doesn't make the news internationally. While walking around the city of Kabul, I've seen more guns and more UN cars than I think I've seen in my entire life. And women here, sadly, are the most oppressed I've ever seen. I really wanted to meet them, ask them a lot of questions, but I just didn't get the chance to meet half the population. Even when they're out, I don't see them. Egypt to Japan without flying, day 94. Today I left Kabul. I took a taxi to the outskirts of the city where there is shared transport to more rural areas. I found the van going to my destination, but it doesn't leave until it's full. So I waited around socializing with locals, including this woman who is very special to me because she's the only woman I got the chance to chat with in my entire time in Afghanistan. She, along with most other passengers, belong to a different ethnic group called Hazaras, who live in the more mountainous areas of Afghanistan, and I'm told they're less conservative. After 2 hours of waiting, we were finally on our way into rural Afghanistan. We passed by nomads, many security checkpoints, through waters, snowy mountains, and canyons. After 4 hours of driving, we arrived at a town at a higher altitude and considerably colder weather. I was looking for accommodation, so I entered this restaurant where they had rooms at the back. This is very common here. They showed me the room, which is just this space with some thin mattresses. While I wasn't a fan, this is the normal standard here, so I took it. Great view, right? Well, the actual great view is the one at the front of the restaurant. I closed the room with my lock, then I met my Russian friend who happens to be here at the same time. We both met in Iran while we were getting our Afghanistan visas. We walked around and met some other travelers. Hey! A Pakistani, an English, and another Russian. Being the first other foreigners I saw in the country, we all joined forces and went back to my humble abode, where we had lunch together. We briefly walked outside of town to check some old caves, and the place where there used to be 2 giant Buddha statues, until they were destroyed by the Taliban in 2001. We then returned to our 5-star hotel, where we commingled our plans for the next day. Also, when you sleep in places like these, that involves the Taliban checking up on you every night. Everyone else decided to also sleep here, and we all depart tomorrow together into nature. Egypt to Japan without flying, day 95. My new friends and I woke up early for breakfast with great views of the mountains. We mingled with some locals on the street, then crammed ourselves into a small car for our day trip, where we started to drive into remote areas. Then it got much tougher. We drove for more than an hour and arrived at our destination, those beautiful crystal blue lakes in the mountains. We drove further, then hiked down to appreciate their beauty up close. There were even waterfalls and a chance to ride horses. We spent about 4 hours there, hiking, admiring, then we started to make our way back. And on the way we separated with the two Russians as we were going separate directions, with the rest of us going to Kabul with the Afghan driver, where, I kid you not, he was continuously recording the road for more than an hour. It got on our nerves a little bit because the car drifted off many times, but we were just surprised how he has that much storage. He finally put his phone down when the sun set and he prayed in the mountains. Then we continued safely to Kabul. Egypt to Japan without flying, day 96. Today I left Kabul, again, and took a long 10-hour bus. Instead of taking it overnight, I took it during the day on purpose because I knew it was going through mountains. The two-way mountain roads were narrow and without guardrails, definitely not for the faint-hearted. With many accidents on the road, I think I've seen 4 overturned vehicles on the way. When we got really high up to get to the other side of the mountains, we had to go through a long tunnel, which was really underdeveloped. We made a stop on the way and I could see so many knockoff brands of drinks. It's pretty regular here. I even once saw a fake Gold's Gym. When we got back down, it was so hot. There were no windows, AC was broken, and it was just a miserable ride. But was cheered up by this local guy who, after just a few minutes of talking, invited to host me at his place. Very kind of him, but I politely declined and told him I already have a host waiting for me. When we arrived, I maneuvered through an army of taxi drivers who surrounded the bus and went to my friend's place, who had this big spacious room for me. We then immediately went to the center to have dinner at this new restaurant. Generous friend host, roof over my head, delicious local food. Couldn't ask for more. Egypt to Japan without flying, day 97. It's my last full day in Afghanistan. My host this morning took me with him to work so I could see how he runs his petrol station. It was very interesting to see. Then we did some sightseeing by going to the big blue mosque where supposedly Ali ibn Abi Talib is buried. There we sat down with the Talib for a few minutes where I could tell he's a bit on the extremist side, so I avoided most of his questions. And actually that's it. That's all the sightseeing there is to do in this city. It was super hot, so we had a local refreshing drink and went to have lunch. We met this chef who's the most famous in the city for serving the most delicious traditional meal. He even let me help a bit with preparing a meal.
يلا يا عمر.
Then we had this ice cream thingy which was handmade and went to the local market which was very chaotic. And at night we hosted about 20 neighbors for dinner, all male. This is something they do almost every week and rotate houses. The traditional way of eating here is by hand, always. So I tried my best to blend in. And having a foreigner amongst them is so rare that I think I became the topic of conversation for the night. Egypt to Japan without flying, day 98, part 1. After almost 2 weeks, today I left Afghanistan. My next stop is Uzbekistan, to which I'm only a 1-hour drive away. But the problem is that the direct border is only open for Afghans and Uzbeks to cross, not any other foreigners. So I'll have to make the long way around through Tajikistan and enter Uzbekistan from there. I hate those stupid border rules. So this morning my host dropped me off at the terminal where there is shared transport. We bid farewell and I found a taxi to share with others that goes all the way to the Tajikistan border. We made a stop along the way where I befriended this local kid and he showed me where he lived, on top of the roof in this makeshift sleeping bag. I told him he had great views of the mountains during the day and of the stars during the night, and then I bought him a refreshing drink before we left. We passed through many checkpoints as expected, and as we got closer to the border, bit by bit the road just started to disappear. From paved roads, to dirt roads, to areas where you just make your own way, like this guy cruising on a hill. I saw 2 kids in no man's land, so I asked the driver to stop and I gifted them my water bottle. They needed a lot more than me. And I parted ways with my bottle less than 1 year of being together, like most of my relationships. Afterwards, there was a small border town where I could exchange my remaining Afghanis to Tajik Sumonis. When we arrived at the border, they told us it was closed for lunch and prayers for 2 hours. When it finally reopened, we went through Afghan customs and passport control. When you're a foreigner there, you're like a celebrity. Everyone is very happy to take pictures with you. And when we were done on the Afghanistan side, we took a car over the Friendship Bridge that connects to Tajikistan on the other side of the river. Egypt to Japan without flying, day 98, part 2. After crossing the bridge from Afghanistan to Tajikistan, I joined forces with this guy from Kazakhstan. Too many stands, I know. The Tajikistan side of the border was very bureaucratic. We had to register our names with 3 different people, but was very easy. After crossing, a 3rd guy joined us and we all shared a taxi together. Immediately after, there was a military checkpoint that took our passports and asked for a bribe to give it back. Now, I've been in this situation many times and I always refuse out of principle, and this time is no different. There is no official fee and we didn't do anything wrong, so I told them I'm not paying a cent and eventually he gave us the passports back. The road was much smoother than Afghanistan, and later the driver got us some snacks and was very interested to check out my Egyptian passport. As we entered Dushanbe, the capital, I noticed a big difference to what I've been seeing in the past 2 weeks. I saw electric taxis, electric buses, the alphabet is Cyrillic like Russian. I went to withdraw local currency, and after 5 failed attempts, from one I was finally able to withdraw some cash. Another first impression I had of Tajikistan is how women dress in these very colorful outfits that are very common. I wanted to take local transport to get to my hostel, and I bumped into this guy who was very kind to walk me to the station and explain to the bus driver where I'm going so that he drops me off at the right place. On the way, I kept seeing these fancy buildings. I feel that I haven't seen them in a long time on this journey. Then I arrived at my hostel, which is owned by a very friendly family, and was shown to my dorm bed where I'll be resting for a couple of nights.